What is going on, guys? Today I have another super quick episode for you. This one is from a podcast called the Iced Coffee Hour with Graham Stephan. That's the guy on the right there, and then he's interviewing Chris Williamson on the mating crisis and extended adolescence. So let's hop into it.
You just talked about everybody being soft in these younger generations, and I completely agree. And I think that's realistically, I would argue that could be the biggest problem for my generation. I say maybe your guys' generation as well. You said that you thought it was the mating crisis for the younger generation. That was the biggest problem that they're facing.
Yeah.
Can you maybe differentiate between the two? And because I feel like it's hard to argue that being soft isn't the biggest problem. Everybody my age, Gen Z, etc., they can't do anything. They can't suffer. Suffering is bad. Suffering equals evil to them.
Well, the two are intrinsically linked, right? What you have is a broad culture of risk aversion. You can just call it that. It's like people just don't want to do risky things, largely. People are getting their driver's licenses later, they're moving out of the house later, they're getting full-time employment later, they're not having as much casual sex, they're not having as much party time, they're not going out and drinking. All of these things would have been moral panics had they been the other way around. But I think people are just interested about, okay, what does this suite of traits, this suite of changes mean? And I think it's pretty evident that it's called extended adolescence. It basically makes adults into children.
And I mean, one of those things, at least one of those is like, going out and like hooking up earlier or drinking and partying earlier. That's not necessarily a good thing. So like that's almost better that some of that's being avoided if it is. But I get what he's saying, right? It's like everything's sort of being delayed. Like people are like essentially like quote unquote like a teenager longer. And he might actually talk about this before, but like teenager, like that wasn't a term that existed for a long time. And it basically describes this extended period of childhood before you're an adult, right? So like it's like what they're talking about is someone being a teenager or like a big kid for longer, rather than shifting into like flying out of the nest, like being the bird that flies the nest, rather than kind of like taking a long time. There's something called like failure to launch syndrome, but it's not really necessarily a failure if you don't actually start getting out there. But again, right, it's maybe a delayed launch.
For longer, and people don't end up growing up. How this relates to the mating crisis is that if you are still living at home, which is the most common living arrangement for men under the age of 35, if you're still living at home with your parents, it's going to be very difficult to date. If you don't have a reliable job, it's going to be...
Well, that's kind of crazy. So because of a lot of different reasons right now, men 35 and under are still living at home. That's pretty nuts, right? Because it's basically gone from it being earlier, right? Like between probably like 18 and 21, I would guess. Like that's what it used to be. Now to 35 or more, right? Like that's pretty nuts. I mean, it shows that there is potentially something wrong. And on one hand, like I get like there's sort of like a financial crisis going on, right? So like I'm not like judging or crapping on someone who is actually working on something and saving their money, right? Like let's say you have like student debt or something, and unfortunately you got yourself into that situation. Now you had to move back home, and you're just crushing your student debt, right? Because of that. That's a little bit different than the guy who's staying at home and not accomplishing anything, right? Because he's basically a big baby in that circumstance, right? Like you might as well just slap a diaper on him, right? Like, and that in turn shows that he doesn't have problem-solving skills to get the finances sorted, right? However he needs to get it sorted, so that he can get the finances, the fitness in order. Because dating, I would say, I don't know what they're going to say here, but I would say dating comes last. Dating should still be a part of it. It should be like, you should be actively learning about female nature and dating dynamics while you're working on these things. So don't like focus on your self-king and completely avoid it, because that's also a bad move, because you basically become a mark or a target later because you thought that dating would become easy once you're buff and rich. And that's quite the opposite, right? Like if you don't know what you're doing with women, it's easy to get into a bad situation, especially if they liked you specifically for your money. So you want to be able to avoid that kind of situation. So I would say like you make the cake, you are the cake, and the woman is the cherry on top. So I don't know if the mating crisis is necessarily like the root cause. I would say part of it is financials and guys getting everything sorted out first, and this also being a big part of it after.
Very difficult to make you an eligible partner. If you don't have your driver's license, it doesn't make you seem like an independent person. So all of these issues are all interwoven.
To be fair, like the driver's license, like a car is these guys would talk about it. A car is a depreciating asset, which basically means that it goes down in value. So like a car, like a lot of things that we're taught in school are like a good, or by society that are like a good investments, are not good investments. Like getting a mortgage on a house, student loans, or a car, right? A car is absolutely the worst one for sure. Student loans, of course, like the mortgage loan is just another way of saying that you're getting in debt, right? So debt, student debt plus mortgage debt plus whatever else, credit card debt, whatever you get yourself into, like you're digging yourself a hole, right? So, I mean, this is part of the reason that guys are struggling with this too.
But the mating crisis and victimhood culture are like two distinct problems that need two distinct solutions, but they feed into each other as well.
So why do you think it is that people are so comfortable constantly being comfortable and they can't ignore the elephant in the room, that they can't put themselves in a position of voluntary suffering?
Because you don't need to. There's no reason to put yourself through suffering. We can go from an air-conditioned house to a heated seat car. We can Uber Eats ourselves a well-cooked meal while we watch Netflix on the TV that we Amazon Primed to ourselves.
And to be fair, you can choose to be a victim your entire life, or you can acknowledge that that's in your past and it no longer exists in your present. You address the fear, move through it, and level up your life, right? So you can make a choice, right? You choose your suffering, basically. Like, live as a victim or figure it out.
Many of the rough edges of life have been eroded. So why would I need to do at what point do I find something difficult to do? People have built buildings inside of which there are heavy things that you pay to have access to so that you can go in and lift these heavy things up and then put them down in the same place. And it's called a gym. We've had to artificially create discomfort in our own lives because it's been completely eroded from our normal existence. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, life has been made incredibly comfortable and convenient, and it's fantastic. And why shouldn't it be? Like, is that not what progress and technological advancement is supposed to do, to improve mortality, improve quality of life? But there's a difference between what you want and what is good for you. And what people want is often immediate comfort, and what is good for you is some degree of resilience training. And also, like, even though we're in a city,
and something worth mentioning here too, which is kind of funny, is like, as much as guys want to have like an ego around it, right? Like, bridges were built, buildings were built, technology was built, all because guys want to, at the core, if you go down to the deepest level, it's because they want to be able to reproduce, have an amazing family, and carry on, right? Which is crazy because a lot of guys will be like, no, man, it's not because of that. Like, or like they have an ego about it, right? But it's like, no. The world was built because men wanted to create families, wanted to attract a great mate, and live a fulfilling life. Like, it's better if we don't kid ourselves about that, right? So he's making a good point here.
Not like a David Gogginsite, like, never find time to watch Netflix, never find time to chill out. Like, that's not me. That's not the way that I'm wired. I think that it's important to have a chill out practice as well as it is to have a training practice.
So do you think it's just people are becoming too complacent? That maybe things are too good? Maybe they're not bad enough to change, but the situation is good enough.
It comes at a massive cost to do what feels good rather than what is needed at a given moment, right? It comes at a huge cost. Why can people not see that one is, in the long run, just overall objectively better for them? And they're fine making that sacrifice.
How do people get fat? One meal at a time. Like, one day at a time, where they eat 200 calories or 500 calories or 1,000 calories more than they expended over and over and over again.
Well, there's two things there, right? Like, one, like, you could ask, why don't they respect themselves or love themselves enough to take care of their body and their health? Right? That's a hard hitter question, but good to ask. And then on top of that, they were sort of talking about like a pain threshold. Like, maybe something hasn't been painful enough to make them move out of their comfort zone or their complacency to move forward, right? Like the way I kind of imagine it, it's kind of a funny example, but like having a needle, right? And getting back, like the person getting back into the needle, or like in a video game, like old video games, there were like spikes on the floor, or like the room would close, right? And you don't want the room to close because you get a game over. But like, basically, it's kind of the same concept. Like, there's a pain threshold, and the more the thing gets poked into you, the more you're like, okay, I'm going to move now, right? So maybe there's not enough of like a threshold there.
a very, very long period of time. And the same thing goes for this. Like, you've read Atomic Habits. You know what, you know how it is. Things that are good for you typically have pain immediately and pleasure in the long run. The lead measure is discomfort and the lag measure is progress. Why would you not optimize for the other one? You never actually see the lagging progress until it catches up with you and you've got 30 pounds overweight and you can't fit into the old set of jeans that you used to have, right? Everybody's going to optimize for what's exactly in front of them, which is usually comfort. And it's not...
Well, also people like they get into situations like with the obesity, like being overweight thing. Like it's like they're not taking care of themselves always and preventing diseases and things from happening. They're like trying to fix it once it happens rather than trying to prevent it, right? Preventative medicine is better than trying to fix it once you already have it, right? It's just like it's interesting that people don't try to just take care of themselves more and move, right? Like move out of complacency to grow their life.
Maybe discomfort. So I think that, is it a byproduct of what I called like the male sedation hypothesis, which I think works for women as well? Screens, social media and porn sedating people out of what would have typically motivated them to go out and do things. Yeah, I think that contributes an awful lot because people can get titrated doses of community through social media, entertainment through screens, and sex through porn, so that they're not motivated sufficiently to go out and do what would have had to have happened 100 years ago, which is entertain yourself, or find friends yourself, or have sex yourself.
So you always speak about casual sex, or I shouldn't say you always, but it seems as though
I just can't stop talking about it. Can't stop
you
talking
walked in
about
here, you're like, yo, man, casual sex.
Yeah,
it seems like you're speaking about it in a positive light. That is something that's needed in some capacity. Because the way that most people, I feel like, see it as like, you know what, it's me getting that instant gratification. It feels awesome, although it's probably not a smart thing. There are STDs, there's the risk of pregnancy. There's also just, you know, knowing that my eventual soulmate is going to know that I've been in bed with 100 people. You know what I mean? Like there are certain sacrifices that you make with casual sex, but you always speak about it like casual sex is an all-time low.
Casual sex isn't an all-time low. The solution to that isn't have more casual sex.
It's like, low, so we got to make it high.
Yeah. Fucking make casual sex great again. So, no, I'm bringing up, and I do bring this up quite a bit, that 50% of men say that they're not looking for short-term or long-term relationships, right? Like between the ages of 18 and 30. We have all been through a good chunk of that period, and you know what reality distortion field the male sex drive is like during that period. I think it's an interesting comment on, oh my God, guys aren't looking for long-term or casual relationships during the period in which your sex drive is maybe at its highest. Wow, like, isn't that an interesting cultural comment? The solution isn't like just, you know, turn it into a Playboy mansion free for all and like people just fucking on the streets. Like that's not what I'm proposing. But I do think that if you were to look at the problem of victimhood and the problem of the mating crisis, i.e. people not getting together and not being bothered about doing it, maybe victimhood is upstream from the mating crisis, but I think the mating crisis is going to kill people more quickly. Dr. Robert Waldinger, the guy in charge of the longest ever longitudinal study on what makes people happy, the single biggest predictor of what keeps you living the longest are the number of relationships that you've got. More than stopping smoking, more than going to the gym, more than changing your diet. The single biggest predictor is how many close friends you've got.
Doesn't that mean instead of focusing on, let's say, optimizing going to the gym or not drinking or no caffeine, we should optimize instead on friendships and relationships?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm totally on board with that. One of the problems that you have is you need another person to do that. Like you're not...
And that's actually, there's a couple studies along the same line that were done of guys like, well, I guess it would go both ways probably, right? Like, so men and women, once they were either divorced and didn't find fulfilling relationships afterwards, like friendships with their family or a partner, like potentially a new partner if they were open to that, or if there's a husband and wife or like a couple, right, that was older and one of them passed away, right, and if they would basically pass away sooner, the one that's still alive, because the other one wasn't still around, right? So like they were more lonely and less fulfilled and fun. It's really an interesting thing, right? It's exactly what he's talking about. Like loneliness is something that leads to a shorter life, in being fulfilled and having like fulfilling relationships, healthy relationships, a community, you know, friends, family, maybe a great partner, right? Like those things extend your life, which is super interesting.
You can go to the gym on your own, and you can do the ice bath on your own, and you can do the sleep on your own.
It's funny that you just said the ice bath thing, right? It's like you can't, if all you're doing is focusing on optimizing it's a good start for sure, right? Like your health, what you're eating, your fitness, your sleep, not smoking, not drinking, etc. like actually taking care of yourself. That's one aspect of it. But then if you're like I'm focusing on myself, King, I'm working on myself, and isolating yourself, or you're checking out of dating, you're going your own way, like that's total BS, right? Because like again, you're creating a situation where you're less fulfilled, and you could probably admit it deep down, right? If you drop the ego about it, it's like, of course you want a fulfilling relationship or fulfilling relationships in your life. So like, instead of isolating yourself, also figuring that part of your life out too.
But you need to find other people. But I wouldn't disagree. Maybe one of the things that was lurking below the surface, what was it? Nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, loneliness.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that would be something else that would get thrown in as well, almost certainly.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of that? Because it seems as though we're not going in a direction where loneliness is getting any better. It only seems worse, and it seems as though different apps are really designed to keep you on the app as long as possible, and they're only getting better. Like all the algorithms that I've noticed for shorts and TikToks are only getting more potent. And so it seems as though at the current rate that we're going, they're only going to continue to get better and better and better, to the point where you're going to go on TikTok and it's going to be so perfectly curated that you can't possibly get off of it, because the cliffhanger after every single one is going to be so great.
I don't disagree. It's scary, man. If you think that the algorithms are compelling now, at least they're restricted by most of the content having to be made by a real person somewhere. When you've got AI feeding the front end and algorithms pushing out on the back end, you basically have an unlimited amount of infinitely split testable, limbically hijacking content that will just continue to race to the bottom of the brainstem. So yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's a massive concern.
Awesome, guys. Well, obviously, a lot of good points in that episode. Good to remember so we can hold ourselves accountable in different areas of our life to just keep leveling everything up at once, not just one area, but all these different areas. So I hope you got some value out of this episode. If you liked it, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. You got this, bro.